Hey folks, and welcome to the conclusion of my Covenant deep dives for Resto DPS, both Catweaving and Owlweaving. With the expansion release pushed back and changes still coming rapidly, it wouldn't be wise to just simply go by the numbers, but I wouldn't go by the numbers anyway. Let's go through them all and get started. So we've been through each Covenant, and now I'm going to do an initial placement, but also noting the pros and cons of each. Therefore, any changes that affect one part of a Covenant, we can more easily place how it moves the Covenant up or down. Also, we are going to take into account the utility and how well the abilities fit into the Cat or Owlweaving playstyle, not just what does the most damage. Target dummies and real scenarios where the party taking damage are fairly different. That said, with all the pros and cons, they are fairly close, and different playstyles will prefer different ones. What I may think is the best may not be for you. A lot really depends on the groups that you play with. And a reminder, this is a focus on Resto DPS. I'm aware that these may not line up with what works the best for healing, but what I know with the best for healing I will mention. However, if Blizzard are balancing, they are going to be balancing mostly for healing. They are not going to be changing stuff just because it boosts or nerfs Catweaving damage. With those disclaimers, along with the beta be beta stuff, let's get started with what I think is the weakest Covenant, the Venthyr. So, why do I think it's the weakest? Honestly, before the most recent build I had the Kyrian lower, but while the Kyrian nerf did little to our damage, the Venthyr nerf, reducing the duration of Endless Frenzy to 15 seconds, really hurts. Frenzy works by using abilities to increase your damage, etc., so it would be strongest at the end. Reducing the duration by a quarter reduces its power by over a quarter. Dedicating 20 seconds to raw damage was hard. 15 seconds is easier, but it's clear this nerf was aimed at the specs performing their intended roles, not Resto DPS. This ability was fairly good before, but I namely suspected thanks to a conduit error and the Sunfire Moonfire buff. Even at 15 seconds, it's only doing that damage if you put in the time. And it's cool, it's just not a style suited for the weaving in of damage. What the Venthyr do have is good soulbinds, very good for damage, and even a few group buffs. I think in a raid scenario where you have other healers to help cover you, I think this is where a Venthyr Cat or Owlweaver shines. Would be good to have a useful signature ability though, I actually think this is one of the weakest ones. As alluded to earlier, my next weakest is the Kyrian. Yes, their ability puts out the best damage on a dummy, but that requires you to spend 20 seconds every 54 seconds doing damage in a row, along with squeezing in other global cooldowns the rest of the time. Again, in a raid setting, it could perform well if you try and cover that part healer, part DPS role, and it's going to be helped by some good soulbinds that cover up some of your weaknesses in healing. However, there will be some times that you do need to heal, and during those times, the nerf will hit you, as will the fundamental flaw in this ability's healing design. Healing is a role where who you need to heal changes rapidly. Having half of your ability heal one DPS that you had to choose before the encounter is not useful. At least the Kyrian do have a situationally useful signature. So the previous two have mainly been down to styles. Good soulbinds can do some things, but the core ability, either 15 or 20 second duration cooldowns, do not fit with how flexible we need to be. And that brings me to the second place and the most flexible ability, somewhat, the Necrolords. Now before we touch the Necrolords, this Covenant falls down a fair bit if you go balance affinity. However, it does gain the most from the Moonfire and Sunfire buff. In fact, I'm fairly certain the reason they were buffed in the first place is to add more balances damage to dots for Adaptive Swarm, and Resto DPS just got buffed in the Crossfire. For Feral Affinity though, 4 dots in our main rotation is a lot. So the ability is fairly good. Its main flaw is its randomness. It will favour targets that you have hots and dots on, but nothing specific between them. It also forces you to spend either a third or a quarter time having it heal. However, the benefits are, as I said before, its flexibility. With the shortest cooldown you can easily swap from more healing focus to damage focus and vice versa, depending on the encounter or phase. If you can get into the rhythm of swapping, dealing damage when it's on the offensive or healing when it's the healing side, you'll do well out of this I think. Alas, you won't do well on AoE and there is just no way around it. All the other abilities help with AoE far better than this one. Adaptive Swarm is a more complex ability, I think. Making the best use of it will be tough, but probably very rewarding if you can do it. However, it's a case of whether you can indeed do it. I also believe its healing prowess is not exactly the best. However, I'm not really entirely sure, but healing tends to be a bit more AoE focused, and as mentioned before, even for healing, Adaptive Swarm is not the best for AoE. Another weakness of the Necrolords is the Soulbinds. Of the four, I think they are the weakest, namely because an overriding focus seems to be on utility or niche things rather than output, but that does not mean that they have situations where they won't perform. After all, niche abilities are going to be useful at some point. On top of that, Fleshcraft is not bad as a signature. While weaker in combat, before raid encounters or during downtime in Mythic Plus, you have a shield that will let you start the fight on an aggressive foot. It's a case of slightly useful most of the time. That then leads us to the top spot, and by far the most popular choice for every druid I've spoken to, regardless of its power, the Night Fae. It's a zone for wild gods. What could make it more druidic? Well, how about how much it truly leans into the flexibility nature of forms? What really makes Convoke special is how much we have a complete choice in what it tries to do. Sure, the abilities it casts are random, but it is organised randomness. The moment they made this ability tied to forms, its style was going to be tied to weaving so well. Convoke may be a cooldown, but it has only a 4-second duration. Squeezing it in is much easier than a Venthyr or a Kyrian. Its numbers perform well too for both single target and AoE. Whether you can spend all your time dealing damage or only a little, you will have time to deal damage with Convoke, and worst case scenario, you use it for healing. The Soulbinds are fair. They may not be the best, but all round they are very solid group buffs, being their main strength, as long as you can handle the requirements. And lastly, Soul Shape. It is a bit of redundancy for sure, but of the two movement ones, I do believe this is the strongest. Now, I'm aware, as it stands, Night Fae is regarded as the best choice for healing, and through my research on Resto DPS, I think it's the choice there too. I am sure that there is definitely the potential that it takes a hit in a patch. Not sure how. If they reduce the ability number again, it starts to lose some of its animation prowess. The idea of doing lots of abilities at once really falls down when you're only casting a few. Perhaps they would also need to reduce its channel time down too. If they remove it being tied to forms, it will be a complete nightmare, and I will be so sad, but I highly doubt they'll do that. I say, as long as they keep it tied to forms, and its original design intention stays the same, a short, powerful cooldown, it is likely Night Fae will stay the druid's favourite in both aesthetics, power, and usefulness. Next up will be the final look at Cat vs Owl. We had the initial one, now we're looking at the final one after looking at all the covenants. If you've watched all the previous videos, you probably have a good idea where this is going, but hey, there's a few more things to look at before we finish off and tick that box. So see you there, and thanks for watching.